Welcome everyone to the SWK Best of Sage Automation webinar. We're holding these webinars monthly to bring you the best tools to help you automate your operations and get the most of your Sage ERP investment. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a few notes about the webinar. We welcome your questions. However, for the sake of audio quality, all attendees will be on mute. You can submit your questions using the questions or chat section of the GoToWebinar sidebar, and we will address them toward the end of the webinar. Our CAMs will also be available to you anytime after the webinar to answer questions about any of our services and products. In today's webinar, you will learn about Sage Inventory Advisor, the app that connects to your Sage ERP to give you the tools you need to improve your inventory replenishment process by cutting excess stock, avoiding stock out, and saving time. So let's begin. I'll hand it over to Russ Graff.
Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate it. Thanks to everybody at SWK and to all of our attendees today. Appreciate you taking some time away from your busy schedules to join us. And so, as was mentioned, our topic today is inventory optimization, and more specifically, I guess, how that can drive improved profitability in your organizations. So we do have a lot to cover, and including a product demo of the Sage Inventory Advisor application itself. So let's go ahead and get started. And as we mentioned, if you have questions near the end, we'll have an opportunity to read those in the question chat box there in your application, and we'll be able to address those at the end. So my name again is Russ Graff. I'm with a company called NetStock, and we are the authors of Sage Inventory Advisor. And it's my pleasure to be with you today. At NetStock, we work with small and medium-sized businesses all over North America and around the globe, for that matter. And these businesses are typically distributors, right? Manufacturers, retailers, even increasingly e-tailers, e-commerce organizations, or manufacturers or distributors that are adding e-commerce functionality. And for many of those smaller businesses, the value of their inventory is the largest asset on their balance sheet, and it's really core to their businesses. And so the question then is, how do the majority of these businesses really manage this critical asset? And certainly to some degree, they use their ERP or accounting software, their Sage 100 or Sage 500 in this audience. But also often they add to that with other add-ons or Excel. And these become increasingly complex efforts as even small, medium-sized businesses now have some pretty complicated supply chain challenges that they're dealing with. And we have found that Excel in particular is in heavy use, and it's really not designed for that purpose, but we find it to be very prevalent. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but before I do that, let me just give this a little bit of extra context and talk about the difference between inventory control and inventory replenishment. When we use the broader phrase of inventory management, I think usually our first thought is to what is really inventory control. It's the handling of the physical product. Packing, picking out of the warehouse, maybe using bin management, doing physical counts, the shipping and receiving processes, maybe using some sort of a device to capture barcodes and capture transactions to track the movement and the availability and count of all the different items in the warehouse. So that's often what we first think of, but we really think of that as only one piece of the overall inventory management environment. The flip side of the coin, if you will, is inventory replenishment, or sometimes called optimization. So that's the part, that's the function of that we find firms using Excel in many cases to try to accomplish that other piece. So the physical management of the product does a great job of telling you what you have and where you have it, how much you have, but it doesn't tell you if it's the right stuff, right? Is it the right product at the right place at the right time? And so that's the side of the coin, the inventory replenishment side, that we address with the Sage Inventory Advisor application here at NetStock. So let's go back to thinking about Excel and all those different ERP applications that we find in use. So oftentimes what we find is that the ERP applications really do a great job of a lot of things, but it turns out that most of them, including Sage 100, Sage 500 does a better job, but still has some challenges that especially those products designed for this market really don't do a great job of managing the replenishment or optimization side of the equation. They typically are missing some functionality They're just fairly rudimentary or simplistic in their approach, and therefore don't meet the need. Or if, on the other hand, sometimes they can be very complicated and therefore difficult to use or understand, and so they tend to be underutilized. And so that leaves Excel oftentimes to fill the gap, and seemingly for some pretty good reasons, right? Excel is generally available. Pretty much everybody knows how to use it, at least at a basic level. It's pretty consistent. Microsoft and the Office applications have done a great job of making that interface very consistent and logical, and you get comfortable with it, at least at a basic level, so you can navigate it okay. And so it's tempting then to use that tool to help manage this application. And we all know people in our organizations that are really Excel wizards, right? We've seen them create some amazing applications and complex worksheets and so forth. And so, and we have this sense that it doesn't cost me anything, right? It's there, it's available, and we know it has some capability, so we tend to make use of it. But is it really cost-free, right? That's the question we need to ask. I think that what we would find is that there are really some very hidden costs and concerns that come out of this. You might not pay much to actually have it on your desktop, but by using this tool to do something that's really mission critical in the organization, you could be actually creating some costs that you're not aware of. And because the reality is Excel is really just kind of a blank development tool or a platform, right? Here's this blank form, and you can kind of make it do whatever you want. But we would argue that in this particular application, that spreadsheets are really not well suited for the challenges of inventory management and inventory replenishment. And we know that there's lots of concern with errors in business spreadsheets. Recent studies, and more than one, have come up with varying degrees of percentage of errors. One recently came up with a number of 88% of business spreadsheets containing errors. Whatever that number is, it's a big one, and it's a concern. And especially if you have worksheets that cascade and the formula from one flows to the next and to the next, it can be very difficult to audit that, and it can be very challenging to come back and identify, 4 spreadsheets down the chain that I've got a calculation error that's now causing me problems in my inventory environment. So we really need to be concerned about that. So let's talk about what this is really all about, though, right? If your inventory is not optimized, if you don't have the proper levels of inventory in your organization, you get some pretty negative results. One, you get excess stock. You have product sitting on the shelves that's taking up space and costing you money. But at the same time, you've got other products that are running out, and you're not able to meet the need of your customer demand when it presents itself. And then we find that individuals that are responsible for managing this task in the organization are spending an awful lot of time just messing around with spreadsheets, trying to figure things out, manual processes, trying to debug formulas. And so you spend half their time or more, just getting to the point of being able to make a decision on what to buy and when to buy it. When we work with clients, as we look at each of these areas, it's not uncommon for us to identify 15, 20% or more in excess stock. So just for some quick, easy math, if your firm has $1 million worth of inventory in the warehouse or warehouses and on the books, that means that perhaps some $200,000 of cash, working capital, is tied up in that excess inventory. And that's money that could, of course, be put to use elsewhere in the business to drive profits. But not only that, there are actually hard carrying costs. Some experts would say that number is 20, 25%. So you might have another $50,000 per year in carrying costs, things like taxes and insurance. Of course, there's shrinkage and obsolescence. You've got to count it and move it around. So there's labor costs, chance for breakage, those kinds of things. So that's tying up cash, and it's actually costing you money, hard costs every year for having that excess inventory. But even worse than that is running out of product when your customer has demand for that, right? And not only do you risk losing that individual sale if a customer has the opportunity to go elsewhere to find what he needs, but if that customer has a positive experience with your competitor, or if that happens often, you may lose that customer altogether. So what's the cost there, right? And so what most firms do, of course, is to avoid that risk of stock out, they tend to overbuy and kind of be blinded to what that's really costing them. And again, that third productivity issue is we just find buyers and planners in these organizations, which oftentimes wear multiple hats in the company, right? They do multiple things. They may not be just dedicated only to the purchasing or buying or supply chain side of the business. They find themselves just running around putting out fires and dealing with an awful lot of stress. So this is pretty critical stuff. If we don't get it right, it has a real impact on your bottom line every single day, every single week, and it really adds up. And so again, even if we have small issues in our spreadsheets, those can really drive some big challenges. So let's talk a little bit more in detail and spend a few minutes on this slide talking about some of those concerns and challenges with spreadsheet management of this application. First of all, it's all about data, right? So you've got to have good, accurate data, which means getting stock balances, sales data, purchase information, purchase histories, and all that stuff, all the open orders, purchase orders, sales orders, all the transactions of shipments and receipts and transfers that are going on, all that stuff that the ERP systems at Sage 100 and 500 do a really great job of capturing all this raw data. All day, our teams spend time entering orders and invoices and then all kinds of transactions. And typically all that data is very nicely stored and organized in well-defined files and tables and so forth. And so if you need to get at that data, it's pretty well understood. You can get in there with Excel and grab all that information. Not super easy, but certainly doable and a repeatable process once you get it figured out. And because the data you need is probably in 7, 8, maybe 10 different files somewhere within the Sage ERP database. And of course, every time you upgrade, whether it's on the ERP side or maybe a new version of Office and Excel, you have to double check and make sure that your data extracts and what you're doing there is still working, is still valid, the file names and structures haven't changed and so forth. So time consuming, kind of tedious, but doable for sure. But besides those accuracy concerns, there's really a control issue, right? Who's in charge? Who is it in the organization that can make those changes and updates to the spreadsheet? Who manages and monitors the quality of the data that's coming out in that process? Does anybody else in the organization really understand what those outputs are? And what happens if that manager or that spreadsheet, that individual is out sick or on vacation? Have I cross-trained people, right? Do I have some risks there? Even worse, what if that person leaves the company? It's not uncommon for us to talk. In fact, I was just on the phone a couple months ago with a company actually in Wisconsin where they told me a story of they hired a really smart kid out of college. He built this great spreadsheet, had all these regression analysis and statistical components built in. He'd done all this fancy stuff, really knew what he was doing, and was great for a while. And then, of course, that individual left. That whiz kid's no longer there, and now nobody has a clue to use what he built. They don't really understand. And some of you have ever taken on someone else's complex spreadsheets. You understand what I'm referring to here. It's very difficult to get to the logic and understand the flow and how are things working in that spreadsheet. So that's a challenge, right? That there's a risk factor there if we've got one or two people in the firm that know how to run this application and then they leave or are out sick or whatever. A big challenge in this whole process is what we would call data synchronization, or the timing of that data pull. So we talked about that you need to dump those balances and those files, but what if you're doing that at different times throughout the morning? Let's say at 9 o'clock you dump the stock balances or your on-hand counts, and then by the time that dumps and then you get a phone call, an interruption, and then you bring in the open POs at 10 o'clock and so forth, you get the idea. Are you really going to have accurate data? Are those files that you've pulled at different times during the day really going to be in sync and compatible? And probably not is the answer. And remember, again, even small data issues, even small incompatibilities there can cascade if we use that data for calculations down the line, can be a real challenge. But then beyond that, so let's say you solve that piece, right? But there's still all these additional planning inputs, things like vendor lead times, and how do you product classify, right? How do you break down your items in different product classes or product lines, and does that impact what you're doing? Safety or buffer stock calculations. How often do you want to buy certain products? And for example, you've probably all done an ABC analysis, right? Ranking your items by value, and the most valuable items being A items, et cetera. So how do those inputs and variables come into play in your analysis? So again, let's assume you got all that figured out. Most firms can't get there, but if you have, great job. But now the challenge is the business and its needs and your spreadsheet all evolve. It's an ever-changing environment. The data gets bigger, the transaction files get bigger, timing issues become more prevalent. Maybe you've got new users come in and out, new processes happening in the warehouse, excuse me, new items that you're adding. So there's an awful lot of change going on. And then you may have your own unique circumstances due to the type of product that you sell or the type of customers you serve, the location or types of suppliers that you have. Things like, hub and spoke warehouse environments. If you've got a central distribution environment and some of the warehouses buy direct from a supplier, but others get replenished from a central distribution warehouse within your organization, how do you manage those data flows? New items that get created. Some organizations create lots of new items all the time. So how do you know how to forecast those? Maybe you have some assembly or kitting going on. That's very common. And so now I've got component demand that has to be blown through from the finished good. So I know that this finished good has a demand, or I'm expecting a demand of X, but now that has a recipe or a bill of materials underneath it that we need to blow through to that component level. So just an awful lot of challenges and complications to this environment. And again, we would just argue that using a spreadsheet is just not very effective for that. So whether you're using Sage ERP, your spreadsheet, or some sort of add-on application, I mean, the point of all this is that you're trying to get to an optimal level of inventory. That's the whole goal. And that really means creating an optimal order, knowing what to buy and how much to buy and when to buy it. And so that optimal order is the one that results in what we would call the lowest possible inventory value with the highest possible level of service to your customers. That's how we define an optimized inventory. We're trying to get the lowest possible inventory with the highest possible fill rates or service to your customers when the demand is presented. That's the nirvana. That's the goal we're trying to get to. So whatever tool you're trying to use and utilize, that's what we're after. And so, and one of the things I haven't really mentioned much of is this concept of a safety stock, right? The first key to inventory optimization and creating these optimal orders is really understanding what you need for safety stock. So how are you calculating that? How do you know what that buffer stock, another term that's used for it, needs to be? Are you looking at really a best practices model there? Are you looking at volatility of the forecast or the demand? Is there seasonality involved, and does that safety stock level change over the course of the year with multiple seasons? Do you have supplier performance that you're taking into account? You might have a standard lead time, but how accurate is that? How often are you updating that? How are your vendors really performing? And those are risk factors that need to really be part of your safety stock calculation. So, so those are some things that can be very challenging as well in trying to get to a level of inventory optimization. So I think we get it, right? Using Excel or native applications within most middle market ERP and accounting applications is just really challenging. There are some holes there, very difficult to manage, and so we really need to have a better solution. So what is that solution? And the solution is a true inventory management system, a dedicated single-purpose piece of software that understands and resolves all these complexities that we've discussed, right? And especially one that, in your case, in this audience, that easily integrates with your Sage ERP application so that we can really remove all that manual and time-consuming and error-prone processes, whether it's dumping data to a spreadsheet, using some sort of custom report. Maybe you worked with your SWK consultants over the years to have them figure out some new user-defined fields and dumping data to a SQL table and then doing some reporting out of that using crystal reports, all kinds of things that we see out there. Whatever that is, all that can go away if you have the proper tool that is really specifically designed for this purpose. And of course, that's what exactly describes Sage Inventory Advisor. So again, in practical terms, inventory optimization, kind of a fancy term, but what it amounts to is I want to reduce my excess inventory. I need to minimize my opportunity to stock out. I want to make smarter buying decisions, and I want to do that very effectively and efficiently, right? I want to do that in a matter of minutes or hours instead of days and weeks, which is what we find in many organizations today. So the Sage Inventory Advisor approach is one that I think warrants your attention. It is a cloud-based application, so it's available on demand, any browser, any device, anytime, anywhere type of application. So a true cloud-based application. It seamlessly integrates to the Sage 100 and 500 as well as other Sage ERP applications. So we're automatically grabbing the data out of the back end of the database all at the same time, typically at night when systems and activities are lessened. So we're getting good quality, accurate, well-synchronized data. It is a dashboard-driven application, and so it really uses a lot of use of graphs and colors, and you'll see that in a minute here when I fire up the demo. Very interactive, easy to navigate, and it really takes kind of a management by exception sort of approach, right? Highlight for me out of my entire universe of SKUs in my inventory, whether that's 500 items or 5,000 items or more, help me identify which issues, which problems, which items have the biggest challenges and issues out there that I need to be focusing my attention on. So it really helps to prioritize and focus effort where it can have the biggest impact on my profits in the organization. And it's really based on best practices from many years of inventory experience within our organization. And the great news is that it's very quickly deployed and very affordable because of this cloud model. It's a subscription type of pricing model, so very easy to get into. You can cancel it, right? There's very little downside risk. You're not making a long-term commitment. So there's just an awful lot of value built into the way that the Sage Inventory Advisor model is delivered and deployed. So the great news is, really that the game has changed for small and medium-sized businesses, right? Big firms could always afford the systems that were out on the market. They had the manpower and the expertise. They had supply chain degreed experts in the organization. They had lots of budget. And so they could spend a year or more and 6 or 7 figures on a deployment of a sophisticated supply chain application and inventory optimization application. And in fact, the founders of NetStock really come from that big enterprise background where they built and deployed those very complex and highly customized optimization replenishment tools for very large multinational companies. So that's the background of the founders of NetStock. But when NetStock formed in 2010, what they decided to do then was to target a middle market environment. They knew now that the internet was a viable delivery method for getting an application out to the masses, if you will, to smaller organizations, and you could do that affordably and in a model that really made sense for smaller organizations. And so that's what they focused on. They took all that experience that they had from all those big environments and all those complex environments and gleaned it down to 80–90% of what was really critically important and built that into a tool for the middle market and branded it with the Sage through an OEM agreement with Sage globally around the world. We're a global organization, of course, as is Sage. And so branded it as Sage Inventory Advisor. And you can see from this screen that we've obviously had some success and some rapid growth. We're now approaching 1,100 firms actually using our application, active companies today, with over 13,000 individual users in those organizations and managing an awful lot of inventory. So we're seeing some very nice growth. Clearly, what that tells us is that we hit on something, right? There clearly was a need in the marketplace for a tool like this for small, medium-sized businesses, and that we're filling a gap here that is just a much better approach than trying to deal with Excel or other custom and manual processes. So with that, let me pop out of my PowerPoint and bring up my demo environment here. And it looks like we're okay there. Nothing timed out on me. So this is Sage Inventory Advisor. When you first log in as a user, this is the screen that you're presented with. I mentioned to you earlier that it is a dashboard-driven model. And I think from a design philosophy, something to keep in mind is, again, when the founders of NetStock built this, they knew, again, who the target market was, that small and medium-sized businesses might now be experiencing some of the same complexities in their supply chain, right? You're buying from overseas, you're selling overseas, you might have 3PLs and other warehouses, you're maybe doing stuff on Amazon or other e-commerce sites. So it has become a very complex supply chain environment, even for the smallest of firms these days. Many selling to big box retailers like Walmart and Target and so forth that have a lot of restrictions and demands and certainly have expectations. And we live in an Amazon-driven world now, right? And talk about customer expectations. Everybody thinks they can, get their product shipped to their door, maybe by drone, in an hour placing the order. So it's really a demanding environment that has impacted even the smallest of organizations today. And so with that in mind, they said, we really need to answer 2 key questions for our customers. those people that are going to be using this application really want to answer two things. What needs my attention? What's out of whack? What's gone wrong? So help me understand where I need to focus my energies and my attention today. And what do I need to order today to either keep myself in balance or get myself into that optimized environment or level. And so that's really the focus. And so this dashboard is really designed to help answer that first question, is what needs my attention. And so what we've got here, I'm going to just give you a high level overview, obviously not designed to be a training environment, but just to give you a sense for how it's designed and how you navigate quickly. We've got 9 different panels on this dashboard. Some would refer to these as widgets or KPIs, key performance indicators. It really gives you a sense of the health of your inventory. Sometimes we refer to this as a health check. And it can be by warehouse. In this case, we've got a Los Angeles warehouse as my default as a user, but I can have multiple warehouse locations. I can have different combinations of those warehouses, different branches, could be regional warehouse locations. I can have that central distribution warehouse, and I can have what we would call a virtual warehouse, where we combine all those items into one virtual view, even though it's not a real physical warehouse. So I've got lots of ways that I can look at it. And then within each of those locations or across all those locations, we're going to do that ABC analysis that I referred to. We're going to rank all your items by value, and these are parameters that can be overridden and come out of the box with some standard defaults, but these can be tweaked for your organization. And so we're going to do that ABC analysis and really rank our items. But in addition to that, we're going to do what we call a high, medium, low measurement or in other words, the speed of movement. We're going to look at the velocity of these same items and how they move through the inventory and rank them high, medium, low in terms of velocity of movement. And then we get this combined view, what we call our matrix view. So this is 9 boxes, color-coded, that really help us get an understanding of the nature of the items. And again, this is by warehouse or across warehouses, again, with some ability to configure this. So we really now get an understanding of what the nature of the items are in our inventory. And of course, these folks up in the upper right-hand quadrant here that are color-coded green, these are my bread and butter items, right? These are high-value, faster-moving items that I probably want to have higher fill rate policies and things like that, pay more attention to, higher profit items for me. So I want to, I have the ability to visually see that information on the dashboard, as opposed to the items in the lower left here in the red. These are low value, slow moving items. These might be nuts and bolts that sit on the shelf for a long time. So I might even question, why do I stock them in the first place? Maybe I've got a vendor that can manage that for me, if I can get them quickly. Or maybe I just buy it in bulk once or twice a year. If they don't take up too much space, they don't cost me too much, just get them out of my hair and stock up on them. So I can make some policy decisions around a better understanding of the nature of my inventory items. And so now when I go back to my dashboard, I can see these different key performance indicators, these metrics of the health of my inventory. And I not only see graphical representation of how am I doing over time, right? Am I trending in the right direction? But then under each one of these, excess stock, stocking out, potential stock outs, surplus orders, which is an order that when it arrives is going to go directly to excess, right? So it's surplus. I don't need the product yet. It's coming in too early. So I can look at each of those different metrics, and then underneath those see the top 5 items that are contributing the most to that problem. And then I can see the color coding here as to how we classify that item. So for example, if I'm looking at my potential stock outs, these are items that are currently in inventory, but we're projecting you're going to run out of those based on the demand profile of those items and the lead times of our suppliers to get those items, et cetera. And maybe we're overselling, we're overperforming against our forecast, so we have risk of stock out. So they bubble up here on my dashboard, and I can see these are all A items on the top 4. I've got a couple of AM items here, so maybe I want to focus on that one first, right? If I've got limited time in my day, here's something that I can be proactive about, make sure I've got a PO created, and if I don't get one done, if I do, maybe I can expedite it to get it here before I run out of product. So I can really be proactive and thinking ahead here, as well as looking at just my overall trend. So here's my overall stock holding of $10 million worth. In an ideal world, based on our analysis and our metrics that we've done in the Sage Inventory Advisor application, we think you could get by with $6.3 million worth of inventory and still hit your target fill rate here of 97%. So here we are overstocked by several million, and we're still not achieving our fill rate. We're making progress. I can see from the trending that things are going the right direction. As I hover over some of these fields, I have the ability to see that information. And so I can see that I'm going the right direction, but I've still got plenty more work to do. And then for any one of these, in addition to the top 5 list, that again helps me focus attention if I've got limited time in my day, I can drill into the detail of any one of these full reports. So here I've got 924 items that I'm already stocked out of that are potentially costing me almost $800,000 in lost sales. That's not good. So let me take a look at what's going on there, and I can drill in and see the full report of all 924 items. And once I'm in here, I can do some sorting and selecting, right? I can sort each of these columns like I can in Excel. So the default sort is by value, but I could sort them by supplier or product code or how we've classified those items, those kinds of things, so all my A items, or I can filter this data. Maybe I want to see all of my A items on this list, right? So or all the A items that I'm stocked out of. So just select that, apply that filter, and now my list of 924 is down to 57. So these are going to be all A items that I'm currently stocked out of, and I can do some further analysis on it. So I've got the ability to get to the whole data scheme, right? I can drill into any of these full reports and see that information for all those items, filter them, maybe send it out in a report to somebody else, either in management or maybe to a supplier or to one of my buyers if I'm managing that team. So I've got the ability to do that. But again, this top 5 list really gives me some great focus and understanding of where I need to, put my energies today. So let's take a quick look. So let's drill into one of these potential stock out items and what's going on there. So as I drill in, I see a great level of detail. And again, the visibility that this application provides to you is something you'd never be able to replicate in any other environment. We've got, again, data that's coming from, 6 or 7 files that could be really problematic to try to get a sort of an aggregate view. So we've really done a nice job of pulling all that together and excuse me, and presenting that to you. Pardon me, fighting a little bit of the tail end of a cold here. So when we take a look at that view, we can now see some static information here, things that come from an item master file typically, price, cost, weight, and volume if I'm tracking that information. And then over on the right, it gets pretty interesting. I've got my demand profile. So the Sage Inventory Advisor application comes bundled with 15 different algorithms, and it's going to look at the historic pattern of consumption of that item, both graphically and in a table format, as you can see that pops up, and then match the best fitting algorithm to that historic pattern. So it found an item here that has no trend up or down that's obvious, but it clearly has seasonality. And so that's the algorithm that it's going to use now to project future demand. But I can also see a little red snowflake here that says that I've got a frozen or amended forecast. So as a buyer or planner, I can take what the computer generates and then certainly make some adjustments if I know something that the historic data might not be showing. Here's that safety stock calculation. I referenced it a little bit earlier. Really a critical component and part of the secret sauce, I think, of Sage Inventory Advisor is our ability to calculate every day for every item in every warehouse what that safety stock calculation should be. What's that buffer stock for this item in this location? So it's looking at my replenishment cycle. How often do I buy it? What's my target fill rate? And I can see because I've classified it as an A medium mover, I've got a 95% fill rate policy on this. I can see my lead time, which I can either import from Sage or calculate myself. And I can see what my risk factors are. How's my supplier performing? How often does it deliver on time and in full? And how well are we performing against that forecast? Is that pretty volatile? Is it hard to predict, or is it pretty consistent? So all those factors combine to produce a safety stock calculation. And now that number flows into this middle panel, which we call our policy panel, where we look at lead time plus safety stock gives me my reorder point. In other words, my minimum. Then if I add my replenishment cycle, and this is both in days and units, by the way, as you can see, and I add my replenishment cycle to that reorder point, I now have my order up to or my max. So every day for every item in every location, Inventory Advisor is going to calculate a safety stock and a min and a max, and then compare that to what I have currently on hand and what's committed and allocated and so forth, and then show me what my current status is. So that's why I'm in a potential stock out status here. I've still got some on hand, but I don't have enough to cover my lead time and my demand, so I better get an order placed. And in fact, it's recommending that I buy 293 days worth or 300 units of this item. So very sophisticated analysis, but yet very easy to understand and interpret and then take action on. And as I slide down a little bit further on this detailed inventory item inquiry screen, I can see more detail about that forecast. Here's those red snowflakes. So for the months of November, December, and January, I've actually overridden the computer-generated forecast. And if I click on Amend Forecast, I can see a little bit more of that detail. So here's my historic performance again. And then as I get to current time, here's my now bar. Here I can see I've created a final forecast that's higher than what the computer generated. And that's maybe one of the reasons that I'm now in a stock out, because we're forecasting greater sales than what we anticipated. So therefore I have risk of running out. And then here a few months out, I've got myself back into sync. So there's an awful lot of of capability here for buyers and planners to make adjustments. I can do this across a range of items. I can do it across a range of months. Let's say I expect we've got a big order coming in. We just sold a big deal to Costco, so I'm going to change that to 400, make that my final forecast, and now we see that dramatic spike automatically represented. And I can apply that new forecast now, and here I see that spike graphically represented here again on the top of the screen, and it may make a difference into what I recommend. In fact, it did change my recommended order quantity now because I've got this increased demand. So a great ability for kind of the art and the science of forecasting, right? We're going to do all the heavy math and number crunching here, but then allow the buyers and planners, allow salespeople and other market influences to come into play and say, yeah, that's great, but we think we're going to exceed that because, right, we've got something else going on that we know about. Here's where I can then take a look at some other detail across this menu bar. So I have one existing purchase order out there for this item, and maybe I want to expedite that. I can see when it was ordered and when it's due. If I pass due, here I have my demo data has me past due on this receipt. And so I'll call my supplier and say, hey, what's going on with that? I'm tracking my supplier performance, both in terms of lead time and level of fill, right? Am I getting full shipments or over or under amounts? How I'm measuring that lead time historically. Any customer orders that are out there already in the system. All this data is coming from Sage, right? Sage is my source of truth. But what we're doing is grabbing all that information, all that raw data, and turning it into really manageable and actionable information on the dashboard. We do have this concept of bill of materials. The item I happen to be looking at here does not have a structure, but we'll grab those kit files and do that blow through demand to a component level. We understand the concept of a central warehouse distribution center type of demand streams. And then we'll provide you with this great projection screen, which really helps us look at over a time phased approach. Here's I've got item that's being depleted. Here's the next order shipment comes in. Now I'm back up here. Now I'm depleting against that. It understands that seasonal pattern. So I can take a look at this in a table format, and it's going to tell me here are the next two orders that I need to place and what I need to buy and when I can expect them to arrive based on lead time after that order date. So this is a 90-day lead time, so I've really got to get it right, because to make my mistakes here, I don't have much ability to adjust and expedite. So, and this can be downloaded to a CSV file, sent to a supplier, and give them a heads up as to what you expect to be buying so that they're ready for you. So, and then we've got some commenting capability as well. So all that is really to answer that first question, what needs my attention? Where are things out of whack that I need to get them back into sync and take some action on it? And then real quickly before I wrap it up and we open it up for questions, one other thing I wanted to show you here is that second question of what do I need to order? So all I did was click on our orders tab, and we're presented now with a list of every supplier that has at least one item that needs to be ordered today based on all of our analysis. And so this is really helpful. Typically, this is how we think about how to place an order, right? We're doing it by a particular supplier. So let's say I needed to place an order for these guys today. It's got 20. I've got this kind of summary snapshot view. So I can see I've got 20 products that I probably need to buy from these guys today. So let's go create that order. And what it's really doing is creating this order schedule, or this kind of workspace environment for you as a buyer or planner to now understand our recommendations, see what those recommendations are, validate those if you need to, confirm them, change them, and then go ahead and issue the purchase order. So now here's all 20 line items that Inventory Advisor is suggesting that I purchase, with every piece of information I could want about them, right? How they're classified. So we see that here, what their current status is, that policy panel in kind of a shorthand. So lead time, safety stock, replenishment cycle. Here's my demand profile and forecast going forward. So if there's anything here that I don't understand or don't agree with, I can always drill into the item and make some changes. I can simply override the recommendation. So here, this first line item, Inventory Advisors tell me I should buy 120, which, by the way, that's more than the MOQ. So we do understand minimum order quantities. So that's in excess of the MOQ, so that's fine. There might be other cases where the MOQ is higher than what's recommended. So that's, of course, what we're going to tell you need to purchase. In this case, we can buy it in multiples of one. Maybe some I have to buy dozens or cases or whatever, or hundreds of something. And then it does the individual unit cost and then extends that for me. So this is a 100 items, 120 items are going to cost me $124,000 for this line item. And so I can make changes. If I don't agree with that, I only want to buy 80 today, I can do that. And now that made a change. It lowered my value. And down in the lower right, I now have this summary table that shows me what changes or adjustments I've made. So this is a workspace, a work schedule where I can, again, have at my fingertips everything I need to either justify, confirm, or change an order recommendation. And then once I've got it right, I click download. And depending if it's Sage 100 or 500 or what your ERP environment is, we've got different techniques for actually bringing that into the application as an open purchase order. So it might be a visual integrator job on Sage 100. It might be a data importer job at 500. And so we're going to create an output file, and it'll automatically trigger the import of that into your Sage ERP. So now you have an open purchase order that you can now execute and follow your standard business rules within your ERP. So that's how we quickly answer that second question. So we've had folks tell us that this has saved them days, if not weeks, every time it's time to place orders on their most important vendors and so forth. And there's so much more to talk about that we just don't have time today. But I just wanted to give you a feel for how effective that can be to really help you, again, get to that focus that you need for how do I optimize my inventory, where do I have challenges, which are the most important items based on how they're classified and what their status is, which are the most important items that I need to really take a look at and take some action on today. And if I've only got an hour in my day out of my 10-hour day that I work, that I can dedicate to this process, focus my attention on the ones that are going to have the most impact on my profitability and my ability to move forward and serve my customers best. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good feel for what a dedicated single-purpose application that's strictly focused on this problem, right? This problem of how much do I order, how often do I need to order it, how do I get my balance, my levels of inventory in balance so that I've got enough but not too much, enough to meet my customer demand and retain those customers and maximize my sales and profits, keep my sales teams happy and my customers happy, to do that but not have warehouses overflowing with product to solve that piece of it. So how do I get to that balance? And you can see, I hope, that with a dedicated specific application with 30 years or more of experience behind it, now leveraging latest technology in a cloud-based environment can really be a game changer for so many companies. And it's why we have, again, 1,100 or so customers active today on the application, and we're adding 30, 35 a month right now is kind of the pace that we're on. So I think you can see why, because we really addressed the problem head on and really take it to the next level of sophistication, but still ease of use. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to to Ashley over at SWK and see if there's any questions that have been added. You still have some time now. If there's something I didn't cover or that I confused you with, please type that into the question dialog box in the GoToMeeting application, and we'd be happy to address those. And so with that, Ashley, I'll send it back to you to monitor that and wrap us up.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Russ. We do have a question from Kara. She wants to know, can you update items in bulk? Example would be lead times, minimum, maximum quantities.
Yeah, if I understand the question, I think it's can we take data from the Sage Inventory Advisor environment and bring it back into ERP? So I talked about how we can create an open purchase order, but we certainly do have the ability, if you want to use the lead time that we're creating in our calculations, if you want to take the min and max numbers that we've got and reorder points and so forth that we've calculated in Inventory Advisor and bring those back into your Sage ERP, the answer is that should be doable, again, using kind of the same tools. Our data is available. We can export that. We would typically do that in a CSV file format, so a comma delimited file. That should be very easy to work with with whatever tool, and depending on what ERP you're on. So the short answer is should have the ability to do it, and we do have some customers that have asked us to do that. Good question.
Okay. Thank you. I think I have one more question. Give me 1 second. Let me pull it up. This particular customer has a question, says we also have multiple customers in Sage. Can we use this app for each of our customers with each of them only having visibility to their particular account?
We have multiple customers in Sage. There can be multiple companies in Sage. Maybe that's what we're referring to here, right? I could have different company codes set up in the Sage ERP application. And we do have the ability to segregate the data, and based on the user login into the Inventory Advisor application, we can give them access and visibility only to certain companies. So I think that's probably what the question is, as opposed to customers. And maybe there's still time to adjust that question if I'm not interpreting it correctly. So if I'm understanding it right, yes, we do have the ability to manage different company databases and allow users to access only those companies that are applicable to them. And even further than that, we can create other kinds of groupings of items or buyer codes that certain buyers only work with certain suppliers. And so their dashboard could be just showing them their data for the products that they're responsible for buying and managing. So there's lots of ways that we can configure the raw data that's presented on the dashboard. And sometimes I make that point, this is kind of probably a good segue. When we looked at that dashboard with the 9 different panels, that view, that format is identical for every one of our 1,100 customers, right? It's a true software as a service or SaaS application. So every customer around the world gets exactly the same view. But what can change is what data gets represented in that view of those 9 panels, right? So is it by buyer? Is it by certain warehouse? Is it by company code, as we just asked? So there's different ways that we can configure and tweak what data gets represented, but that view is identical for every one of our users, which makes our support so much more effective and easy for all of our customers. We're not dealing with heavily customized environments all over the place, and everyone's a little bit different. So, hopefully that answered that question.
You did. I got confirmation that you answered it perfectly. So I think we have one more. If you have an order that is a one-time buy that you do not want to affect your regular forecast, is there a way to address that?
Again, short answer is yes. I probably want to have one of my technical experts, and we do have a product specialist at Sage, a gentleman by the name of Tom Wilson, that SWK can engage to talk with you specifically about your situation. But I believe the answer is yes. There's ways that we can, segregate different data pulls and things like that. If there are certain items or warehouses or locations and product classes that we don't need to worry about in terms of planning, or if there are certain activities or transactions that need to be excluded, we should be able to do that typically, yes.
Okay.
But my experts are better at how to actually do that.
I think that's it. I had one more quick question for you, Russ. How is the Sage Inventory Advisor price, number one, and how long does it typically take to implement?
Sure. Yeah, good questions. Yeah, the pricing has two components to it. There's what we call a one-time activation fee, which is what it takes to get you onboarded and up and running and live on the application. We've got a very nice, well-defined 5-step onboarding process that we walk you through with coaching. It's all done remotely, but we've become very good at it. The NetStock team actually does that deployment and coaching process with you. And so that 5-step process is what we call our activation, is covered by what we call our activation fee, and that is always going to be $2,250. So $2,250 is the one-time activation fee. And then the other component is the monthly subscription fee, and that number varies depending on the size of the inventory that we're managing. So if you've got a $250,000 worth of inventory, it's going to be one price. I think that would be at $199 a month. If it's $1 million worth of inventory, I think that's closer to $300 a month. $3 million worth of inventory, I think it gets closer to $400 a month. So as the value of your inventory increases, so does that monthly subscription fee. But of course, so does the return on investment and the value of the application increase greatly for you as well. So that's how we kind of scale and price the product is based on the value of your inventory that we're managing. So again, if you've got a QA warehouse or some other set of items that we don't need to plan around and don't need to focus on, we don't have to bring that data into the application, and then you wouldn't be charged based on that value, right? So we can be pretty flexible there. So very cost effective. I mean, the return on investment is a matter of weeks. And if there was other assets that you could buy in your organization, whether it was equipment or facilities or whatever, with that ROI and payback period, you would do it in a heartbeat. The second part of that was deployment time. So I described that 5-step process. I would say that typically we're targeting a 4 to 6 week process to get you up and running. The first couple steps are pretty rapid. We get you installed and you get your first dashboard pretty quickly within a week or so of signing a contract with us, assuming you're available. So we'll move as quickly as the end user is able to do that. But then in the third step, what we call our data refinement step, is probably where we spend most of our time doing what I just kind of talked about, making sure that we're configuring the data that gets represented, makes sense, that we've got all that understanding of who the buyers are and the product lines and all that. And that's where we're doing some testing and tweaking and playing. And that might take a couple weeks to work through that process. And then once we've got it configured the way we want, working with typically 1 or 2 lead people at the company, then we turn it loose to other users and start the training process once we've got it configured the way we like. So usually 4 to 6 weeks. If you've got a manufacturing environment with a lot of complexity or lots of different locations and warehouses, maybe that stretches out by a week or 2, but very rapid deployment, very rapid return on investment.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I guess we'll want to thank everyone for attending the SWK Best of Sage Automation webinar. If you are an SWK customer and have any questions about Sage Inventory Advisor, please reach out to us at camteam@swktech.com. That's CAM, C-A-M. Our next Best of Sage Automation webinar will be on November 15th with Sage Fixed Assets. Keep an eye out for our email invite for this event or visit our website at www.swktech.com for more information. We hope to see you then, and thank you again for attending.